The nursing home didn't feel like a place where surprises belonged. It sat on the edge of a small town that went quiet early, the kind of town where people knew the sound of each other's cars and where the same few streetlights painted the same pools of amber on the pavement every night. The facility itself had been built in a practical era. 2 floors, long corridors, clean signage, windows meant to let families see comfort from the outside. Comfort, in buildings like that, is mostly routine. Inside, everything had a rhythm that kept panic away. The medication carts moved on schedule. The night staff walked loops that were almost ceremonial. The air smelled faintly of laundry detergent and floor polish, a smell that tried very hard to mean safe. Even the sounds were predictable. A TV murmuring behind a closed door, a distant cough, a wheelchair wheel clicking softly over a threshold. The back side of the building was where the real work hid. That's where the service road ran, narrow and mostly unseen from the main entrance. That's where the dumpsters sat behind a wooden enclosure. That's where deliveries arrived early, and where the maintenance corridor entrance lived under a plain metal awning. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't designed to be. It was simply there, a functional spine running behind the softer face of the home. On that backside, in a strip of shrubs and leaf litter between a fence and a storage shed, a hedgehog began doing something that didn't fit the neat, human order of the place. Mila first noticed it because she was tired in a specific way, not the dramatic exhaustion people talk about. The kind that makes you hyper-aware of small sounds because your brain has no extra energy to filter them. She was a night aide, used to quiet emergencies, a resident who woke confused and tried to leave, someone who needed oxygen adjusted, someone who couldn't sleep and wanted a hand to hold for a minute. Around 1:30 a.m., she stepped outside to the service area with a small bag of laundry tags and a knot of keys that always sounded louder at night. The air was cool and dry. A distant highway hissed softly. Everything felt still. Then she heard the leaves, a faint rustle near the shrubs, low to the ground. She aimed her flashlight down the narrow paved strip that led past the dumpster enclosure. The beam found a small, rounded shape moving with calm determination, no frantic zigzags, no panicked freezing. A hedgehog, bristled, compact, and oddly serious, crossed the path as if it belonged to it. It didn't hunt around the bins. It didn't pause to sniff garbage. It moved across, slipped through a gap under the bushes, and disappeared. Mila smiled and forgot about it the way people forget harmless oddities when they have a job to return to. The second night, it happened again. Not in a cute coincidence way, in a this is a route way. She saw it through the glass door as she walked past the back exit, the same little silhouette appearing from the shrubs near the fence line and heading toward the same gap on the other side. It moved straight, with a sense of intention that made it look almost like a tiny commuter. The third night, the pattern broke. Mila didn't notice the hedgehog immediately. She heard it first, that crisp leaf sound that didn't match the wind because there was hardly any wind. When she looked, the animal was halfway across the paved strip and then it stopped. Not a dramatic stop. Not a freeze of fear under the light. A pause that looked like a calculation. Its nose lifted slightly. Its head tilted. For a few seconds it did nothing. Then it shuffled faster than she'd seen before and vanished under the shrubs with a speed that didn't match its usual calm pace. Mila's body reacted before her thoughts lined up. a small tightening in her stomach, a prickling at the back of her neck. It was the same sensation she'd had in the past when something in the building wasn't right, even before it became obvious. An oxygen alarm once, faint at first, a resident quietly slipping out of bed, a hallway that suddenly smelled wrong. Smell. That was the next thing. When Mila stepped onto the service landing, she didn't smell smoke. It was earlier than smoke. A warm, bitter odor that didn't belong outside at night. Overheated plastic. Insulation getting too hot. The kind of scent you catch near a power strip that's working beyond its limits. She stood there, still, letting her brain catch up. The scent was strongest near the maintenance corridor door. The maintenance corridor ran behind the kitchen and laundry areas. It wasn't meant for residents. It held pipes, panels, wiring runs, and supply storage. It was also the place where problems hid, because problems love places nobody visits unless they have to. Mila pressed her palm to the metal corridor door. Warm. Not, the heating system is doing its job. Warm. An odd warmth concentrated in a way that felt localized. She opened the door a few inches. Warm air rolled out and carried that chemical bite with it. The corridor itself looked normal at first. Pale walls, conduit lines, a few electrical boxes. Then her flashlight beam caught something small and awful. A thin orange flicker behind the seam of an electrical panel. It wasn't big. It wasn't roaring. It looked like a tiny ember breathing behind a crack. But that's how the dangerous ones begin. Quietly. Patiently. Mila closed the door again, because feeding it oxygen was the last thing she wanted to do. She moved quickly back into the building and pulled the nearest fire alarm. The sound sliced through the calm like a blade. Night calm is fragile. It shatters fast. Lights switched on, doors cracked open. Some residents stirred and sat up with slow confusion. A few faces appeared in doorways, dazed and frightened by the noise, the sudden brightness, the interruption of the only thing that reliably existed for them. Routine. Dito, another night aide, appeared at the end of the corridor, hair slightly messy, eyes sharp, with instant seriousness. Mila didn't need to explain much. Her expression did the job. Dito grabbed the extinguisher mounted near the service entrance. Mila radioed the nurse on duty, Eka, to start moving residents away from the back corridor wing. Not an evacuation of the whole building yet. A relocation away from the risk. Eka moved like someone who had practiced emergencies until they became muscle memory. She didn't treat residents like a crowd. She treated them like individuals with different needs. Someone on oxygen. Someone who wouldn't wake easily. Someone who woke too easily and panicked. Someone who had fallen earlier in the week and needed 2 people to stand. The building began shifting, not in chaos, in controlled motion. Mila and Dito returned to the maintenance corridor door. Dito opened it wider than Mila had because you can't fight what you can't see. The air inside was warmer now. The faint crackle was sharper. Mila's flashlight beam landed on the panel seam again. The glow had intensified slightly. It was still small. Still, maybe manageable to the optimistic part of the mind. Dito discharged the extinguisher in a controlled burst. White powder exploded into the corridor like a fast fog. The orange flicker disappeared immediately. Relief hit Mila for half a second. Then, the crackle returned. Lower this time. Not at the seam. Behind it. Electrical fires are cruel like that. They hide inside walls. They travel along conduits. They can look extinguished and still be actively building heat somewhere you can't reach. Mila's relief vanished. They weren't equipped for this. Not safely. Not completely. The decision was simple. Call the fire department. Mila called 112 and gave the dispatcher the details that mattered. Nursing home, elderly residents, suspected electrical fire in the maintenance corridor behind the kitchen and laundry areas, possible wall involvement. The dispatcher's voice tightened into professional urgency. Help was coming. The next minute stretched in a way that didn't match the clock. Eka kept moving residents, guided by the floor plan in her mind. She chose the dining hall as a temporary safe zone because it was far from the maintenance corridor and had multiple exits. Another aide, Nino, began marking rooms and checking that nobody was left behind in the most exposed wing. She used a clipboard and a pen like it was a life-saving tool, because it was. Mila stood near the corridor door, monitoring the smell, the heat, listening for any change. The alarm sound echoed through the hallways, making people restless, stirring confusion in those who didn't understand why alarms existed. Some residents cried quietly. Others grew angry. A few simply stared, silent and pale, because fear sometimes looks like emptiness. Outside in the service area, the hedgehog appeared again. Mila saw it through the glass when she glanced down. It emerged from the shrubs, crossed the paved strip faster than before, paused briefly near the corridor wall, and then vanished toward the fence line. It didn't linger. It didn't circle. It moved with urgency, as if it wanted to get away from something. Mila felt a cold thought creep in. The animal had reacted to something before she did. Not heroism, not magic, sensory reality. Small creatures live close to the ground, where heat, vibration, and scent show themselves sooner. A corridor wall that was warming up might feel like a change in the world down at hedgehog level long before it reached human noses. The first fire engine arrived with lights that splashed blue and red across the trees and the building's pale walls. The sound of the siren hit the nursing home like an emotional shockwave. Staff tightened their grips on residents' arms. Residents flinched. Firefighters entered with brisk focus, carrying equipment that made the situation feel suddenly real in a way alarms alone never do. They didn't waste time on drama. They used a thermal camera on the corridor wall. The screen showed a bright patch of heat spreading behind the electrical panel. A second hot zone appeared above it, creeping toward the ceiling line. The fire had already moved behind the wall. They cut power to that section of the building. The lights in the kitchen wing flickered and went out. Backup lighting kicked on in softer, dim tones. The building felt different without its usual electricity hum, like a living thing holding its breath. Firefighters opened the panel carefully and then cut into the wall. Drywall came away in chunks. Heat rolled out. Behind the wall, a bundle of older wiring sat in conduit with insulation that looked brittle. A connection point had been arcing, tiny sparks snapping intermittently until the heat finally found something it could feed on. They extinguished what they could see and cooled the cavity. They pulled out nearby storage boxes, cardboard, linens, cleaning supplies, the fuel of ordinary life, things nobody thinks about as dangerous until they become dangerous. A firefighter ran the thermal camera again. The hot patch dimmed, then brightened again. Not where it had been. Higher. Heat had migrated into a secondary space above the corridor, possibly into the ceiling void. That was where the situation sharpened into something that could have become catastrophic, because the ceiling void over that corridor ran toward an area where oxygen cylinders were stored in a small supply room. Not a large storage depot, but enough that if fire reached it, the risk would multiply fast. In a nursing home, oxygen is common. It is also a fire accelerant when mishandled or exposed. The firefighters moved with new urgency. They opened ceiling tiles down the corridor. They found smoke staining. Not thick smoke yet. A thin, dry smell and faint haze. Early stage, still controllable, if they stayed ahead. They vented the corridor. They used fans to push smoke outward rather than letting it spread through the building's ventilation system. They checked duct routes. They checked the adjacent laundry chute area. Fire likes hidden pathways. While all of that happened, the nursing home's internal tension rose a notch. Residents wanted their rooms. They wanted their blankets. They wanted to sit in their own chairs. That need can become stubborn and dangerous. Eka kept her voice steady as she guided them. She didn't promise things she couldn't guarantee. She didn't let panic show. She made the dining hall feel like a temporary living room rather than an emergency holding pen. Some staff members began to feel the delayed tremor of fear. Hands shaking slightly, throats dry, eyes too wide. Mila felt it too, the body's realization that this could have been much worse. Then it almost did. A firefighter called out that the thermal camera was showing rising heat in the ceiling void above the laundry area. Not a flame breakout, a growth. The kind that can suddenly become visible if it finds the right material. They moved quickly, opened more ceiling sections, and found smoldering insulation near an old junction box. A small hidden ember had traveled along the conduit line, fed by accumulated lint dust and aged insulation. It was the perfect quiet fuel, dry, fluffy, invisible in normal inspections. They soaked it. They scraped away lint buildup. They cooled the surrounding area until the thermal camera showed darkness. Finally, slowly, the building moved back toward safety. The firefighters performed a full sweep. They checked the attic spaces. They checked the oxygen supply room. They checked the kitchen ventilation ducts. They verified no reignition. When the all clear came, it didn't feel like celebration. It felt like fatigue. Residents were guided back to their rooms. Some cried from relief, though they didn't have the language for it. Others forgot the incident within minutes, their minds sliding away from stress, as if it were water off glass. A few stayed upset, unsettled, the alarm noise lingering in their nerves. Mila stepped outside afterward because she needed cool air and because she wanted her senses to reset. The service area looked normal again, which felt strange. Same fence, same shrubs, same dumpsters. The world had barely changed, and yet her internal world had. Near the shrubs, she saw movement. The hedgehog. It was there again, smaller than the situation it had indirectly helped reveal, sniffing leaf litter as if nothing in the human world mattered. It did not look like a guardian. It looked like an animal doing what animals do. Mila watched it cross the paved strip and disappear under the bushes with that steady little waddle. And she understood something that bothered her. She had almost missed the smell. If the hedgehog had crossed calmly as usual, if it hadn't paused and changed pace, Mila might not have stepped outside at that exact moment. The warm plastic odor might have stayed faint for longer. The ember behind the panel might have gained strength. In a nursing home at night, minutes are not abstract. Minutes are the difference between a small contained fire and smoke in sleeping rooms. The difference between an orderly relocation and panic. The difference between staff controlling an emergency and losing control. The next day, management began their official process. They thanked staff. They offered calm statements. They promised audits. They placed a temporary ban on certain electrical devices until inspections were complete. They scheduled electricians. The official language was tidy. Behind that tidy language, the real truth was less flattering. Over the following week, electricians found a long chain of almost fine. The panel had been running hot. The wire bundle was old. Some connections were loose. A portable heater had been used in the laundry area on cold nights because the room's built-in heating was inadequate. The heater was plugged into an extension that wasn't rated for sustained load. Someone had replaced a scorched power strip earlier in the month and treated that as the fix because it removed the visible symptom. But the load remained. The facility had also been using an old chest freezer in a storage closet to hold extra ice packs and special dietary items. It was plugged into the same circuit line feeding the laundry heater at night. Not every night. Enough nights. Enough to create the perfect stress pattern, repeated heating and cooling, insulation aging, connection points loosening, arcing beginning. Nothing in that chain felt dramatic to people who make small compromises to keep work moving. That's why it was dangerous. The investigation did not find arson. It did not find a single villain. It found maintenance shortcuts, policy gaps, and people trying to solve immediate problems with whatever tools they had. Not malicious, just human. The facility's director ordered a full electrical overhaul of the affected wing. They replaced the panel. They replaced old wiring runs. They installed circuit monitoring that flagged overheating and abnormal load patterns before things got to the point of a hidden ember. They also changed staff policy. No personal heaters in back rooms, no unapproved power strips, no temporary devices connected without logging, no extension cords treated like permanent infrastructure. The policies were printed, signed, posted. People nodded. People promised compliance. Mila didn't care much about the posters. Posters are easy. She cared about the building's smell. After the incident, she began noticing scents with a new seriousness. A slight electrical tang in a hallway, a warm dust odor near an outlet, the faint, bitter note of plastic warming under load. She stopped assuming the building's routine meant safety. She started treating routine as a mask that could hide problems. The staff culture shifted too, subtly. People spoke up faster when something felt wrong. They reported flickering lights. They flagged outlets that felt warm. They logged equipment instead of plugging it in and hoping it didn't matter. The nursing home became safer in an unromantic way. Fewer small lies told to themselves. And the hedgehog kept crossing the back path for a while. Not every night in the same obvious way. Sometimes earlier, sometimes later. Sometimes in rain when the path was darker. Sometimes in dry air when the leaves sounded like paper. It didn't become a mascot officially. Nobody put up a sign. Nobody named it publicly. Still, staff began to watch for it. Not because they believed it had supernatural instincts. Because it had become a symbol of attention, and attention is valuable in a place that survives on routines. Then, in late autumn, it disappeared. The shrubs thinned. The leaf litter changed. The ground cooled. Maybe it found a different route. Maybe it moved closer to a garden where food was easier. Maybe it went somewhere safer. Small animals are fragile like that. Mila noticed its absence more than she expected. On some nights, she found herself glancing toward the back door without meaning to. The path looked empty, ordinary. The shrubs were just shrubs. She didn't like that, because the hedgehog had turned an invisible part of the building into something she paid attention to. And when it was gone, it was like losing a small reminder to stay awake in the world. Winter came. The nursing home grew cozier in the ways buildings do when the outside gets harsh. The heating systems worked harder, staff wore thicker sweaters, residents asked for extra blankets. The building felt sealed in. Then, one night, months after the fire, Mila smelled that bitter, warm plastic note again. Not strong, faint, just enough to make her heart tap once against her ribs. She stopped in the corridor and didn't talk herself out of it. She didn't tell herself she was imagining it. She didn't wait for the smell to become obvious. She walked to the back wing, checking outlets with the back of her hand the way firefighters had taught her staff during a follow-up training. One outlet felt warmer than the others. Not hot, but wrong. She traced the plug to a device. Someone had brought a small space heater into a staff break corner near the laundry area, hidden behind a chair and angled toward a cold wall. Probably harmless, in their mind. Probably just for a few minutes. Mila unplugged it. She logged it. She reported it. No argument, no lecture, just action. The next day, management addressed it calmly but firmly. The policy wasn't theoretical anymore. It was enforced. This time, the building did not come close to burning. And that's the point of learning. When you learn the correct way, the story ends quietly. No sirens, no thermal cameras, no residents sitting in a dining hall at 3 a.m., wondering why the world has become loud. A few weeks later, something else happened that made Mila's throat tighten. She stepped outside near the service area to dispose of a bag, and there, near the shrubs, was movement again. The hedgehog. Or another hedgehog. She couldn't be sure. They look alike if you're not someone who studies them. Small, bristled, intent. It crossed the path. It paused briefly near the fence line, nose down, then continued. Mila felt a strange relief. Not because she believed the animal was a guardian returning to duty, because it meant the back path still belonged to something alive besides staff and dumpsters. It meant the world's quiet systems were still running alongside hers. She did something small after that. She placed a shallow dish of water near the shrubs, tucked out of the way where it wouldn't attract pests or cause trouble, just a small offering in dry winter air. She didn't mention it to anyone. She didn't turn it into a story. It was respect, more than kindness. The nursing home stayed open. Residents stayed safe. Staff kept doing the work that rarely gets praised properly. The building returned to being mostly boring, which is what buildings like that should be. Mila kept one thing from that night, though, and it wasn't a heroic feeling. It was a practical rule that lived in her body now. When something small breaks a pattern, pay attention. That rule is not poetic. It doesn't make headlines. It is, however, the kind of rule that keeps a nursing home from becoming a tragedy. And it started with a hedgehog that used a back service path like a routine, until one night it didn't.